People make millions of dollars selling books trying to convince you that they have the shortcut to success, to wealth, to notoriety, whatever it is that you really desire. They try to convince you they have an angle, an insight that you're just not aware of. Now, the reality is this: there are no shortcuts. The Bible makes that very clear. But God's principles absolutely act as accelerators. So today we're looking at the relationship between Elijah and Elisha and why those principles absolutely apply to you and I. One of the things we need to realize is people everywhere, in fact, throughout all of history, people have always been looking for a shortcut, an angle to get ahead, to get whatever version of success they're looking for. But the way God created things, there are no shortcuts, there are no angles. In fact, all shortcuts are really dead ends. But one of the things we need to realize is God's principles, properly applied, not only will accelerate us, they will propel us into our future, into our destiny, and into God's blessings. But almost always, God's principles, they're counterintuitive. They seem foolish to the world, to the natural mind. Why? Because God's principles require us to put our trust in Him. Rather than trying to strive to get ahead, many times His principles are all but the exact opposite, but that's what will accelerate us forward. Now, in this episode, which I've wanted to do for a while, we're looking at the relationship between Elijah, and Elisha, and we're going to see several attributes that I believe were the things that were later going to propel Elisha to actually surpass his master. So let's jump right in. Now, as you're probably aware, Elijah was a prophet. He was not just a prophet, he was the prophet of his generation. He was used powerfully by God. And there comes a day when Elijah meets Elisha. Now, when they meet, Elisha is plowing. So Elisha's family are farmers, and we could guesstimate that they were relatively successful, because what do we see? We see there's 18 teams of oxen plowing. I kind of get this mental picture like you see on a farming show with all these combines in a row harvesting a field. So there's 18 teams of oxen, and Elisha is in the very last team. And just like later Jesus would say to the disciples, Elijah says to Elisha, "Follow me." Now Elisha says, "Let me say goodbye to my family." And Elisha says, okay, or Elisha says, "Go ahead." But one of the things we see is Elisha's heart. So what happens at this point? Elisha takes his team of oxen and butchers them, uses the yoke as firewood, cooks the meat, and gives it to the people. We start to see the kind of man that he is. What does he do? He leaves to go serve Elijah. See, the first attribute we need to recognize is servanthood, serving others. See, the world would tell us, get what you can get for yourself. But frankly, God says, serve others and I will propel you forward. And why? Because see, Elisha was not going with Elijah to be his counterpart, his associate. Frankly, it says he was going to be his helper. He was going to be a servant. Now, he did. He served faithfully. Now, we jump ahead in the story, and this is where it gets really interesting. There comes the time, and Elijah knows that God is taking him up to heaven. Not killing. He's not going to die. He's being taken up to heaven. Now, why? We don't know. Was this a test? Who knows? But what we see is Elijah repeatedly tells Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord is telling me to go to this place." So what is he doing? He's trying to put Elisha off. Now, why? Again, we don't know. We won't speculate. But what do we see? We see the second quality in Elisha's life. And now later we'll see the result. But that second quality was commitment. It says it this way in the Good News Bible. Now again, this is happening repeatedly. And every time Elisha says the same thing. And the Good News Bible says it this way. I swear by my loyalty to the living God, I will not leave you. I swear by my loyalty to the living God. He is absolutely committed. Now, on a side note, what we see is each time also other prophets come to Elisha and say, you know, he's about to be taken up, right? And Elisha said, basically, let's not talk about it. We see absolute, total commitment. Now, again, this happens repeatedly. You know, there's times when we're facing repeated setbacks when, frankly, it would be so easy to get discouraged, to start questioning, maybe I'm supposed to stay. But what do we see? And that's the third quality, absolute tenacity. We see, even though he is repeatedly told to stay behind, he follows through in that commitment tenaciously, following Elijah, sticking with Elisha, and repeatedly saying, I swear by my loyalty to the living God, I'm not leaving you. See, he demonstrated servanthood, commitment, tenacity. Now there comes a moment. Now, this is what we need to recognize. See, the world would tell you, go grab everything you can. And what do we see in Elisha at this point? We see him responding pretty much the opposite of way the natural mind would say to do it. And at this point, Elijah says to Elisha, tell me what you'd have me do for you before I go. Now we see that fourth quality in boldness. But see, boldness must be applied at the right time. So often we use boldness right out of the gate. Where, okay, yes, he butchers the oxen, gives it to the people. Now he's bold. Okay, I want more. No. He has earned now the right. And so he's also, though, in his humility, bold. So when Elisha says, what can I do for you? What does he do? We've seen his humility to serve. Now he can be bold. And he says, I want a double portion of your anointing. See, Elijah had no power of his own. That anointing was God's power working through him. And Elisha asked for twice as much. Now Elisha tells him, hang on, it's not going to be that easy. So he's asked with boldness, but Elijah tells him, it's not going to be that easy. You must be with me. You must see me when I'm taken up. And if so, then you'll have it. You know, so often when we finally are bold, then we relax. Well, and this is a reminder that no, we must follow through to the very end. Now, as you know in the story, Elijah is taken up. Elisha receives that double portion anointing. God used him powerfully for something like 60 years coming forward. He became the prophet of his generation. And God did use him in a powerful way. But it all started with servanthood and commitment, in tenacity, and then finally boldness when it was the proper time. But some of you might be sitting here saying, but Randy, I don't have an Elisha in my life. Well, so often we do and we don't recognize it. But here's the thing. Regardless, whatever you have to do at the moment, whether you know what your calling is, what your anointing is, what God is propelling you to or not, whatever you have in front of you at this moment, the Bible tells us to whatever we do, do it full-heartedly as if unto the Lord. But better yet, it goes on and it says, when we do it as if it's unto the Lord, there is an inheritance as our reward. So whatever you're doing right now, do it as if unto the Lord. There's an inheritance in that. And God designs that uniquely for each one. But also, one of the most basic principles is faithfulness. as you and I are faithful with whatever is in front of us, as we're found faithful in the little, then God can put us in charge of more.